50 meters. That is how close this shipwreck lay to Cleopatra's Temple of Isis. It spent 2,000 years underwater, yet Greek graffiti remained carved into the keel, and not a single archaeologist on Earth had ever found a vessel like this before. Ancient texts described floating palaces with temples on board. Every historian dismissed those accounts as exaggeration. In December 2025, that debate ended. But what exactly did they pull out of the mud? Why was it lying right next to a temple dedicated to the most dangerous goddess in the ancient world? Here is what we know. The ship is 35 meters long and roughly 7 meters wide. It has a flat bottom, no mast, and no sails. It was propelled entirely by oars, about 20 of them. In the center, where a cargo hold should be, there is a gap, a wide-open platform, clearly designed to carry something heavy and ceremonial, a pavilion, a shrine, or possibly something that no modern archaeologist expected to find on a vessel this old. The ship was buried under 1.5 meters of harbor sediment, sitting in 7 meters of water. Greek letters are scratched into the central beam of the keel, not printed, not stamped, but scratched by hand by someone who was alive when the Roman Emperor Caligula ruled the known world. And those letters are still legible after 2,000 years at the bottom of the Mediterranean. This is the first vessel of its kind ever discovered, anywhere on Earth, in all of recorded history. But 3 pieces of evidence tell us exactly what this ship was used for. The third one connects it directly to the most famous woman who ever lived. We need to start with the texts, because for 2,300 years, the ship only existed on paper, and what the ancient writers described sounds completely insane. Around 200 BC, a Greek historian named Alexandria of Rhodes visited Egypt. He was invited to inspect a ship built by Pharaoh Ptolemy IV, and he wrote down every single detail. The vessel was 91 meters long. Let that register. 91 meters, longer than a Boeing 747, 2 full stories tall, rising 18 meters above the waterline. It had a banquet hall with 20 dining couches, paneled in Lebanese cedar and Milesian cypress, columns carved from Indian stone, capitals made of ivory and gold. On the main deck sat a rotunda-shaped temple of Aphrodite, containing a life-sized cult statue in Parian marble. On the upper deck, a second temple, this one sacred to Dionysus, the god of wine, with a grotto built from gold and gemstones, and filled with marble portraits of the royal family. The ancient Greeks had a word for these ships: Thalamagos. It means chamber carrier, or more precisely, bedroom bearer, because the original purpose of these vessels was to carry the pharaoh's private quarters across the water. A floating palace designed for feasts, rituals, and displays of wealth so extreme that even the Romans thought it was obscene. But it gets stranger. The historian Appian claimed that Ptolemy II owned 800 of these vessels. Not 8, 800. And Suetonius, the Roman biographer who documented the lives of the emperors, wrote that Julius Caesar planned to sail one of these ships with Cleopatra down the entire length of the Nile, all the way to Ethiopia. His soldiers refused to follow him. They looked at that boat and said no. So why did nobody ever find one? For over 2,300 years, scholars assumed the writers were lying. Royal propaganda, poetic license, ancient clickbait. Nobody builds a floating palace with a marble temple bolted to the deck. That was the consensus for 2,300 years. Then a man named Franck Goddio proved them wrong. Goddio is not a university professor. He is a French underwater archaeologist who has spent 40 years pulling ancient cities out of the ocean. In 2000, he discovered Thonis Herakleion, an entire Egyptian port city submerged under 10 meters of water in Abu Qir Bay. He pulled a 5-meter tall red granite statue of the god Hapi from the mud. He found 70 shipwrecks in one site. He recovered a stone tablet that settled a 2,000-year-old debate about whether Thonis and Heraklion were two cities or one. They were one. And since 1996, Goddio has been diving in Alexandria's eastern harbor, mapping the sunken remains of the royal quarter, the place where Cleopatra lived, ruled, and died. In October 2025, his team put cameras on the keel of Shipwreck K1, and instantly, every textbook on ancient shipbuilding became incomplete. But the ship is only half the story, because where it was lying changes everything. Goddio did not find this wreck in the open ocean. He found it inside what was once the most exclusive piece of real estate in the ancient world, the royal port of Antirhodos. Antirhodos was a small island in Alexandria's harbor. The geographer Strabo called it a rival of Rhodes. It was not open to the public. It was private property of the pharaohs. For 300 years, the Ptolemaic dynasty lived here, entertained here, schemed here. Cleopatra received Julius Caesar on this island. She raised Caesarion Ho, her son by Caesar, behind these walls. Mark Antony built a private retreat on the neighboring promontory after losing the Battle of Actium, a lodge he named the Timonium after the famous misanthrope of Athens, because he wanted the world to know he was done with humanity. Strabo also wrote that the royal palaces covered 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire city. The Brucheion district, temples, colonnaded avenues, ship houses, and the Caesareum that Cleopatra built for the deified Caesar. The obelisks that once stood in front of that temple are now in London and New York. We call them Cleopatra's Needles, but the building they guarded is at the bottom of the sea. How does an entire royal quarter disappear? The answer involves one of the most catastrophic days in the history of the Mediterranean. July 21st, 365 AD. A magnitude 8 earthquake ruptured beneath the island of Crete. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus was alive when it happened. He wrote that the sea pulled back from the shore, stranding ships on exposed sand, fish flopping in the open air. People ran out to collect them. Then the water returned. Ammianus wrote that huge ships were hurled onto the roofs of buildings in Alexandria. Some were thrown nearly 2 miles inland. Thousands drowned in minutes. The earthquake liquefied the deltaic mud that Alexandria's foundations sat on. The royal quarter slumped. The island of Antirhodos sank below the waterline, and the harbor sediment surged over everything like a burial shroud. But here is the detail that makes this story almost unbelievable. Shipwreck K1 did not sink in the 365 AD earthquake. It sank around 50 AD, 315 years earlier. The ship was already sitting on the harbor floor when the tsunami hit. It had been lying there, exposed, for over 3 centuries. And the tsunami did not destroy it. The tsunami buried it. It sealed the ship under sediment. It created an oxygen-free capsule that preserved the wood perfectly for the next 1,660 years. The catastrophe that erased Alexandria's royal quarter is the same catastrophe that saved this ship, destroyed and preserved by the same event, separated by 300 years. Like and subscribe. And now we arrive at the evidence that turns this from an incredible discovery into something genuinely unsettling. The ship was found less than 50 meters from a temple of Isis, and not just any temple. This was the temple that Cleopatra personally renovated and expanded. Because Cleopatra did not simply worship Isis, she built her entire political identity around becoming Isis. She dressed as the goddess in public ceremonies. She placed Isis imagery on official coinage. Royal documents referred to her as Nea Isis, the new Isis. She was telling the entire Egyptian world that the goddess of magic, motherhood, and resurrection had returned in human form, and she used every tool available to make that message stick, including a ship. Every year, on the 5th of March, a sacred vessel would depart from this exact harbor. It carried a statue of Isis in a ceremonial procession called the Navigium Isidis. The ship sailed through the Canopic Channel from the royal port to the sanctuary of Osiris at Canopus. The entire city lined the waterfront. Priests chanted, incense burned. This was the single most important religious event on Alexandria's calendar. And the ship at its center was not a warship or a merchant vessel. It was a floating shrine. Goddio believes Shipwreck K1 might be that vessel. Not a party boat. Not a luxury cruise for wealthy elites sipping wine among the lotus blossoms, which is how Strabo described Alexandria's rich using their cabin boats. The actual ritual ship of Isis, the vessel that carried the goddess Cleopatra claimed to be. But not everyone is convinced. Timmy Gambine, a maritime archaeologist from the University of Malta, who was not involved in the excavation, called the find spectacular. He warned that it has not yet been scientifically confirmed whether this vessel is actually a Thalamagos. The wood species have not been published. The radiocarbon dates are not final. The full graffiti translation is still in progress. So we have two theories competing for the same wreck. Was this the ancient equivalent of a billionaire's super yacht? A luxury vessel where Alexandria's elite held banquets on the water? Or was it the sacred bark of Isis, the centerpiece of the most calculated piece of political propaganda the ancient world ever produced? Both explanations fit the evidence. Neither has been ruled out, and the argument between them is only getting started. But there is one more twist, and this one has been hiding in plain sight for 400 years. In 41 BC, Cleopatra sailed up the river Cydnus to meet Mark Antony for the first time. The Greek biographer Plutarch described what happened. A barge with a gilded stern, purple sails dyed with Tyrian murex, a pigment more expensive by weight than gold. Silver oars, keeping rhythm to the sound of flutes and pipes. Cleopatra reclined beneath a golden canopy, dressed as Aphrodite. Boys costumed as cupids fanned her. Attendants posed as sea nymphs at the rudders. Word spread through the city of Tarsus that the goddess of love herself had arrived to feast with Dionysus. Shakespeare took Plutarch's description and turned it into the most famous ship passage in the English language. A burnished throne burning on the water. Perfumed sails that made the winds lovesick. For 4 centuries, scholars called this poetry. Beautiful imagery drawn from Plutarch, elevated by Shakespeare, but not a description of a real ship class. Pure literary invention. Now look at Shipwreck K1 again. Flat bottom, central pavilion, oar-propelled, no sails. Built in Alexandria's royal harbor, designed for ceremony, spectacle, and the projection of divine authority. It is not the Tarsus barge, but it is the same tradition, the same engineering philosophy, the same purpose. Shakespeare was not writing fantasy. He was describing a product specification, and Goddio just pulled the receipt out of the water. So if one Thalamagos survived under the silt, what else is still down there? The numbers are staggering. Goddio estimates that only 5% of Thonis Heracleion has been explored. That city alone contained 70 wrecks and a temple complex. In Alexandria's harbor, 400 hectares of the royal quarter sit on the seabed. The tomb of Alexander the Great has never been located. The complete library of Alexandria has never been found. And 5 months before the pleasure barge was announced, a separate team lifted 22 stone blocks from the harbor floor near the Kate Bay Citadel. Each block weighed up to 80 tons. Together, They formed the entrance to the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. 2 ancient wonders surfacing from the same harbor in the same year. And the people doing the diving say they have barely started. UNESCO has decided that Shipwreck K1 will not be raised. It will not go to a museum. It will stay on the seabed, exactly where it sank, sealed under international protection, visited only by permitted divers. The first ship of its kind ever found. The vessel that turned 23 centuries of so-called exaggeration into documented archaeological fact. The craft that may have carried the goddess, the last pharaoh of Egypt, worshipped as her own reflection. It will remain 7 meters below the Mediterranean, exactly where the earthquake put it 1,600 years ago. We started this video with a debate that lasted 2,300 years. Were the floating palaces of Egypt real, or were they ancient fairy tales? That question has been answered, but a much bigger one just opened. Because if this is what 5% looks like, what is the other 95% hiding?